In the winter of 1946, a 6-year-old boy climbed into the back of a milk truck before dawn. The streets of Federal Hill, Providence's Italian immigrant neighborhood, were still dark and frozen. Frank Caprio sat among the glass bottles, watching his father Antonio make deliveries door to door. The elder Caprio worked 7 days a week as a milkman, supporting a family of 5 on wages that barely covered rent. Young Frank didn't know it then, but these early mornings would shape everything that followed. He was learning what hard work looked like. Antonio Caprio had arrived in America with almost nothing. He spoke broken English and possessed only an 8th-grade education from the old country. But he carried something money couldn't buy, a belief that his children could rise higher than he ever would. Every morning at 4, he'd start his milk route. Every evening, he'd come home exhausted, his hands cracked from the cold. Frank watched his father count coins at the kitchen table, always coming up short. Antonio would look at his son and say the same thing: education was the only way out. It became the family creed. The Caprio family lived in a small tenement apartment where heat was a luxury and space was scarce. Frank shared a bedroom with his siblings, doing homework by dim lamplight. There were nights when dinner was little more than pasta and beans. His clothes were hand-me-downs, patched and repatched. At school, Frank noticed the differences between himself and children from wealthier neighborhoods. Their shoes were new. Their lunches were full. But his mother Joyce had taught him something crucial: poverty was a circumstance, not an identity. He could study his way beyond it. By age 10, Frank had his first job. He shined shoes on the corner of Atwells Avenue, the main street cutting through Federal Hill. 5 cents a shine. On weekends, he helped at neighborhood stores, stocking shelves and sweeping floors. The money went straight to his mother for household expenses. But even while working, Frank kept his father's words in mind. After his shift at the shoeshine stand, he'd hurry to the public library, books tucked under his arm. He read everything he could find. Education and work weren't separate paths for Frank. They were 2 rails of the same track leading somewhere better. At Central High School in Providence, Frank stood out not for wealth or connections, but for relentless determination. He woke at 5 to work before classes, attended school all day, then worked again in the evenings. His grades remained excellent despite the exhaustion. Teachers noticed the boy who never made excuses, who asked thoughtful questions, who stayed late to understand difficult concepts. Frank joined the debate team, discovering he had a gift for persuasive argument and clear reasoning. His guidance counselor pulled him aside one afternoon. "Have you thought about college?" The question felt impossible. College required money the Caprios didn't have. The idea of college felt like reaching for the moon. Frank's father made $60 a week. Tuition, even at a state school, was beyond reach. But Antonio Caprio had spent 18 years preparing for this moment. He sat his son down at that same kitchen table where he'd counted pennies for decades. "We'll find a way," he said. Frank applied to Providence College, a local Catholic institution. He won a partial scholarship based on grades and need. For the rest, he would work. 3 jobs: washing dishes at a restaurant, clerking at a law office, and continuing weekend shifts at the neighborhood store. In 1956, Frank Caprio became the first person in his family to attend college. Of Frank's 3 jobs, the law office clerkship changed everything. He filed documents, delivered papers to the courthouse, and observed lawyers at work. He watched them argue cases, negotiate settlements, advocate for clients. Frank saw something powerful: law was a tool that could protect people, settle disputes fairly, and give voice to those without power. It reminded him of the values his parents had instilled through years of honest labor. One attorney, noticing Frank's keen interest, began explaining legal concepts during quiet moments. The young man absorbed everything. By his junior year, Frank knew exactly what he wanted to become. Frank graduated from Providence College in 1960 with honors in political science. Law school was the next mountain. He applied to Suffolk University Law School in Boston, a school known for accepting working-class students and offering night classes. Again, scholarships covered only part of the cost. Again, Frank worked multiple jobs. He commuted from Providence to Boston, attended evening classes after full workdays, and studied past midnight. His classmates came from all walks of life, many with similar stories of struggle. They pushed each other forward. Frank's Federal Hill upbringing had prepared him for this grind. He'd been working and studying simultaneously since age 10. This was just more of the same, only the stakes were higher. The 3 years at Suffolk tested Frank like never before. He'd arrive in Boston exhausted from a full day's work, sit through 3-hour lectures on contracts and constitutional law, then drive home to study case law until 2 in the morning. There were moments of doubt. Nights when the exhaustion felt crushing. Mornings when the alarm rang after 4 hours of sleep and he wondered if he could sustain the pace. But then he'd remember his father on that milk truck in the freezing dark, working without complaint. He'd think of his mother stretching every dollar to feed her children. Their sacrifices dwarfed his own. Frank kept going. In 1963, Frank Caprio graduated from Suffolk Law School. The diploma represented 23 years of continuous striving, from that first morning on his father's milk truck to this moment. But a law degree wasn't enough. He had to pass the Rhode Island bar examination, a grueling 2-day test that determined who could practice law in the state. Frank studied for 3 months while working full-time. On exam day, he sat among hundreds of candidates, many from privileged backgrounds with expensive prep courses. Frank had his Federal Hill grit and a mind sharpened by years of doing more with less. 6 weeks later, the results arrived. He'd passed. Frank Caprio was now an attorney. Frank didn't chase opportunities in big corporate firms downtown. Instead, he opened a small practice in Federal Hill, the neighborhood that raised him. His office was modest, his clients were working people, immigrants needing help with paperwork, families in housing disputes, workers injured on the job. Frank charged what people could afford, sometimes nothing at all. He understood their struggles intimately because he'd lived them. Word spread quickly through the Italian community. Antonio Caprio's son, the one who used to shine shoes on Atwells Avenue, was now a lawyer helping his own people. The waiting room filled with faces that reminded Frank of his parents. He was exactly where he belonged. While building his practice, Frank became active in local politics and community organizations. He volunteered with legal aid societies, served on neighborhood boards, and advocated for better resources in working-class districts. Frank believed deeply that those who had climbed out of poverty had an obligation to throw a rope back down. His reputation grew beyond Federal Hill. Civic leaders noticed the young attorney who worked tirelessly for no recognition, who turned no one away, who treated every case with equal seriousness whether it involved $10 or $10,000. In 1974, Providence city officials approached Frank with an opportunity. They wanted him to serve as a public defender. He accepted immediately. Frank spent years as a public defender, representing clients who couldn't afford private attorneys. He won cases others thought unwinnable. He fought for fair treatment in a system that often overlooked the poor. Judges noticed his preparation, his integrity, his genuine compassion for defendants. In 1985, 22 years after passing the bar, Frank received a call that would define the rest of his career. Rhode Island's governor wanted to appoint him as a municipal court judge. Frank thought of his father Antonio, who had died 2 years earlier, never having seen his son take the bench. Antonio had planted the seed on that milk truck 4 decades ago. Now it had grown into something he'd barely dared imagine. On his first day as a municipal court judge in Providence, Frank Caprio sat in the chair and looked out at the courtroom. He saw faces like his parents, working people, immigrants, individuals struggling to get by, some making mistakes, all deserving dignity. Frank made a decision that would set him apart from most judges. He would listen. Truly listen. Not just to the facts of each case, but to the circumstances, the stories, the humanity of each person before him. He would remember what it felt like to count pennies, to work 3 jobs, to feel the weight of circumstances beyond your control. Justice, Frank believed, required both law and compassion. He would deliver both. In the years that followed, Judge Caprio developed a judicial philosophy rooted entirely in his Federal Hill upbringing. When a defendant appeared before him, Frank didn't just see a case number. He saw his father, working 7 days a week and still struggling. He saw his mother, stretching limited resources to keep the family whole. He saw himself at 10 years old, shining shoes for 5 cents because his family needed every penny. This empathy didn't mean Frank was soft on genuine wrongdoing. It meant he looked at context. A parking ticket could devastate a family already on the edge. A young person's mistake didn't have to define their entire future. Frank judged with both accountability and mercy. Years later, when Frank's courtroom videos would reach millions worldwide, people would marvel at his kindness and humanity. They would call him compassionate, fair, understanding. But those who knew Frank's story understood the truth: he wasn't remarkable. He was simply being true to where he came from. Every decision reflected the lessons of Federal Hill. Every moment of mercy echoed his parents' struggles. Every second chance he offered was the chance his family had fought to give him. The boy who rode in the back of a milk truck had become Judge Caprio. But he never forgot that he was, first and always, Antonio and Joyce Caprio's son. The values forged in poverty had traveled all the way to the bench. Frank Caprio's journey from Federal Hill to the municipal bench isn't just a success story. It's a testament to what shapes a person's character. The poverty that could have broken him instead built his empathy. The father who could barely read taught him the value of education. The mother who stretched every dollar taught him resourcefulness. The neighborhood that had so little gave him everything that mattered: community, dignity, and purpose. When young Frank climbed into that milk truck in 1946, the journey had already begun. It took him through shoeshine stands and dishrooms, through law books and sleepless nights, through courtrooms where he defended the powerless, finally to the bench where he could serve them. The milkman's son had found his calling. And millions would come to love him for never forgetting where he came from.